the issue left between the Turks and the Greeks, whether it's Kashmir, the problems left between Pakistan and India, and you sort of look at South American countries, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Chile, Argentina. The history is littered with wherever there has been a horrid dictatorship, the only supporters of that dictatorship have been or has been the USA and continues to be. So in that context, we've got to look at what's happening in the Middle East, and in particular what's happening to Bahrain over the last 45 years. So I don't want to take too much time of our guest speakers because we've got 4 speakers, and I do want to leave about half an hour for Q&A after they have made their presentations. Our first speaker that was published is unable to be here, but kindly Reverend Gilly has stepped in as usual to help us sort of have a good discussion. So I will introduce our first guest speaker, who is a spokesperson for Campaign Against Arms Trade. He's a supporter of Bahraini human rights and democracy and has worked for CAT since 2014. He has written for a range of publications, including The Independent, The Guardian, and Huffington Post. He graduated from the University of Dundee. He worked with the Brent Council and occupied various posts with Lensons, Oxfam, the Fifth Business and the Scottish Parliament. He has also worked with the Dundee University Students Association and Archives, Record Management and Museum Services. Kindly welcome Andrew Smith to make his presentation. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much to the organisers of this event for inviting me, and thank you very much to everyone who has come along tonight for what I think is a very important discussion, and what I expect will be a very interesting discussion. I'm going to talk mainly about the arms trade side of things, but also about the political support which consecutive UK governments have provided for the regime in Bahrain, because there can be no clearer example of the hypocrisy at the heart of UK foreign policy than the UK's relationship with Bahrain. It exposes the gulf between the rhetoric and reality, where on one hand the government will talk about the importance of human rights and democracy, while at the same time arming and supporting tyrannies and dictatorships. And this has only become more intense since the uprising. Since the uprising in 2011, we've seen even greater collusion, we've seen even greater compliance, and we've seen an even stronger relationship developing between the UK government in Whitehall and the regime in Bahrain. Looking specifically at arms sales first of all, since the uprising in 2011, we've seen over £50 million worth of arms sales to Bahrain. These have included machine guns, they've included sniper rifles, they've included gun mountings, they've included assault rifles and anti-armor ammunition. All of these things are designed to strengthen the Bahraini state, whether that is the police or the military, and it's a thin line between the two. But they've also been designed to curry favour with the Bahraini regime. This has represented actually a very significant increase, because in the 3 years prior to the uprising, arms sales were about £2 million a year. So for that to go up to about £10 or £12 million a year suggests that there has been a greater focus on Bahrain, and that to the arms companies, the conflict has been a business opportunity. And to the arms companies, the conflict has been a chance to sell even more weapons. And to the UK government, it has been a chance to support them in doing so. The results of these have been deadly, and it isn't just the arms sales to Bahrain which have been deadly. Because in March 2011, Saudi Arabia sent UK supplied armoured vehicles into Bahrain to safeguard the infrastructure. The UK has supported Saudi Arabia every step of the way throughout its compliance with the Bahraini government. And we've seen Bahrain invited to the UK specifically for the sole purpose of buying weapons. Only last September, the Bahraini government was at the Dicey Arms Fair in East London. This is kind of like a shop, this is kind of like going to a supermarket where the only product on sale is weapons. In fact, only last month the Bahraini regime was at the Farnborough International Air Show where they were shopping to buy even more weapons. These things have happened with not just the full agreement of the UK government, but the full support of the UK government. The government has been that body which has pulled out all stops to strengthen this relationship. Every single year, the UK also publishes its list of priority markets for arms exports, and since 2014, Bahrain has been on that list. This has gone alongside a greater focus on lobbying, with government ministers going over to Bahrain and having the red carpet rolled out for them, providing nice photo ops where they've embraced the regime, where they've talked very highly of it, where they've said very nice things about them in public and defending them to the international press. Throughout recent visits, we've seen the signing of a new defence agreement, which hasn't just provided a greater military relationship, it's also seen the opening of a new UK naval base in Bahrain. This is paid for by the regime and is providing a permanent military presence for the UK in the country. What we found out subsequently is that this is being paid for by the Bahraini government. It was gifted to the UK. And one question is, why would they do that? Why would the Bahraini government spend lots of money on providing a permanent military presence for the UK? And a large part of it is because they've got a lot to be thankful to our government in Whitehall for. Because it's not just the arms which they've been buying, it's also been the political support, and the very visible political support which has gone with it. Casting our minds back to May 2011, at the same time as Bahrain was under martial law, David Cameron played host to the Crown Prince, inviting him out for red carpet treatment in Downing Street. Those photos would have been projected in Bahrain and around the Middle East to send one message, a message that's loud and clear, which is the UK is supporting the Bahraini government in what it is doing. Similarly, in 2013, Cameron hosted the King of Bahrain again, and we've seen regular visits for Windsor horse shows where they get together with UK royalty to watch horses parading around and giving yet another propaganda vehicle to the regime. 2014 also saw visits from Prince Andrew and from Prince Charles, who were there not just to promote arms sales, but to promote ever closer relations and ever closer relationships. And there has been a political pressure on the government to change its track. In 2013, the House of Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, which is a cross-party group, urged the government to put Bahrain on its list of countries of concern. These are countries where the government has a concern about the state of human rights and democracy. At the time, it refused. Although at the time, the Foreign Affairs Committee also noted, and I'll quote them, they said that both the government and the opposition in Bahrain view UK defence sales as a signal of British support for the government. The UK government should take this into account when considering high-profile sales. And this is a key point, which is that you can't talk about human rights and democracy at the same time as selling weapons. The two directly contradict one another. You cannot say that you're trying to stop conflict at the same time as you're directly profiting from it. And while the profits have been rolling in, while the arms companies have certainly been getting enriched by it, we've seen former Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond talking about the significant progress which is taking place in Bahrain. He has said that it's a country which is travelling in the right direction. At almost the exact same time as he said that, Nabil Rajab, the head of the Bahraini Centre for Human Rights, was locked up for 6 months for sending a tweet that criticised the king. These are the direct consequences of these. These are the direct consequences of where we can see political support on one hand leading to repression on the other. And that there is a point where campaigning can work, whereas campaigning has to work. And actually over the last couple of years, the government has finally added Bahrain to its list of countries of concern. That took a lot of pressure. And there has been a greater exposure over recent years in the media and in Parliament of what has been happening and of the hypocrisy and the doublespeak at the heart of UK foreign policy. And we need to keep up that pressure, because the alternative is to ignore it. The alternative is for the issue to be kind of brushed under the carpet and for the status quo to continue. And it's an untenable status quo for the people in Bahrain who are paying the price for it. At Campaign Against Arms Trade, we stand full square behind the peaceful opposition to the Bahraini government. We know that you do too. We think that we have to take part in the discussion about what can happen and how democracy can be promoted. Because we believe that human rights and democracy are universal, and politics is about making choices. You're either with the people protesting on the streets of Bahrain, or you're with the government that is repressing them. You're either with those who are being detained, who are being oppressed, who are being tortured, or you're with those who are doing the torturing. We know whose side we're on, and we know whose side we want the UK government to be on as well. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for keeping to the time. Very kind of you. I'd like to proceed to our next guest speaker. He is a blogger from Bahrain and a Bahraini himself and a human rights defender. He's the founder of the Bahrain Online, a popular online forum and pro-democracy news website. We were talking about Brother Rajab. You haven't spent time in, have you, in Bahrain? Although he went into hiding in March 2011 to escape the Bahraini government's crackdown on protesters, he was convicted in absentia for plotting to overthrow the government and sentenced to 15 years in prison. That's the reason you are not in, you are here. In 2013, Abdul-Iman fled to the UK, where he was swiftly granted political asylum. On May 21st, 2013, the Danish think tank CEPOS held the annual Freedom Award, where he received the Freedom Prize. He also won the Helmut Award for Human Rights Watch in 2011. Please welcome a survivor, dare I say, of the repression in Bahrain, Ali Abdul-Iman.
Hello everyone, and thanks for Al Abrar and Gulf Cultural Club to host me and give me the opportunity to talk here about the Bahraini and British government relationship. I'll be talking about some event from recent history that's happened, which is related from between the Bahraini government and the British government. And I want you, while I'm talking, just to think about this question. Will the British government will be proud of what they did in the past and what they are still doing toward the people of Bahrain, or it's something to regret it? It's something that they don't admit it. Okay, the relationship between Bahrain and the UK or United Kingdom is going back 200 years. Now, the Bahraini government is celebrating the 200 years of long-standing relationship between the United Kingdom and Bahrain. I'll be only talking about some events happening in the past 100 years. I'll start with Isa bin Ali. He was the governor of Bahrain since 1869, from 1869 until 1923. He was appointed by the political agent, by British political agent, after some internal war between two brothers, Muhammad bin Khalifa and Ali bin Khalifa. Isa is the son of Ali bin Khalifa. He was appointed, he was appointed by the political agent, the British political agent, in 1969. And he was forced to step down, 1869, sorry. And he was forced to step down in 1923, also by the British political agent. He was forced to step down because of so many petitions that the people of Bahrain signed, complaining about the way he was oppressing them, the way he was treating them. So that's why he was forced to step down, and he was succeeded by his son, Hamad bin Isa. Hamad bin Isa was on the throne from 1923 until during his time. Actually, there was too many uprisings happening. One in 36, I think, and in 56, I think it was his son. But Charles Belgrave was appointed by the British political agent as a consultant for the emir. He was a British citizen, and he was the decision maker in Bahrain. He was helping to managing the budget of the country. issuing regulation of what should happen in Bahrain until 56 or 57 when he forced to resign because of the uprising happening in between 54 and 56, which is the first uprising that united the Sunni and Shia in Bahrain. Also, I would like to mention that in 1956, 1939 until 45, during the World War II, as a way that the people of Bahrain wants to express their feeling toward the British, they were sitting in the coffee shops and listening to German radio, which led Charles Belgrave to arrest many of them because of this. And also it's happened in 56 during the war between Egypt and British, France and Israel. There was some demonstration in Bahrain and some violence in the street, and Belgrave was attacking them, and he killed, I think it's around between 4 to 6 people at that time he killed. After 57, and the uprising happened, which is ended by 56, around 5 public figures from Sunni and Shia being forced to live in exile. In 1966, I think, 66, Ian Henderson was hired again by the British political agent, and he was assigned with a clear mission that he need to build a security forces to help the governor of Bahrain or the regime of Bahrain to control the country. Ian Henderson was in his position from 60s until 2000. Ian Henderson is a former colonial officer in the British from the United Kingdom. During his time, the independence of Bahrain, 71 happened, and Ian Henderson was on the top of the Ministry of Interior later on when they created the ministry. The constitution happened, but dissolving the parliament and announcing the state security law, which is just like the martial law in 76, arresting and torturing many people. Many died in 70s because of the torture in 80s and 90s. He was in his position as a number one or decision maker in the Ministry of Interior until 2000, when the current king succeeded his father to the throne. So they just tried to open what they called it at that time, open a new page. Ian Henderson was having a house inside the Ministry of Interior. So I would like also, in my last point, to highlight this, that the king himself, his father, which is the previous emir, his uncle, which is the prime minister since 71, I think it's the time that the UK used to use the shilling, and his cousins, his brothers, his sons, all of them attended the Sandhurst Royal Academy here in British. And in this academy, they taught him how to rule the country. So after all of these events and points I'm highlighting, I just want to ask you, do you think that the United Kingdom should be proud of supporting such regime and to interfere in internal political issues just to support the regime, the royal family? I'm not expecting that the government of the British government will say sorry, because we recently heard Tony Blair that he will not be sorry for what he did to Iraq. But you, as a free thinker, do you think that the UK government will be proud of what they did to Bahrain? Thank you.
Brother Ali, I think the British government may be proud because the ruling elite in UK is proud of whatever they've done, but the ordinary people in UK, I think, are very, very less proud of what their government does. As you may recall, when Iraq was going to be attacked, 2 million people turned up in London to show their absolute abhorrence and dislike of what the government was planning to do. But obviously it fell on deaf ears, and we know what the history is, that Mr. Blair went on to attack Iraq and still has the arrogance and the conceit not to apologize. But I'm sure recently, as you know, in Malaysia, a tribunal was held, just like the one after the Second World War, Nuremberg type of trials, where Mr. Blair has been pinpointed as one of the criminals, international war crime activities. So in certain countries, if he does step down, perhaps he may be arrested. So let's hope one day, soon, inshallah, the Almighty willing, that he is arrested in one of the countries that he does step his foot on. But certainly in London, not far from here, where he lives, he's enjoying a wonderful life with many guards outside. Thank you very much. What I do want to say is that you talked about Sandhurst. There are two bastions of British Empire which rule. Whether if it's a military dictatorship, they're Sandhurst educated, or if they're civilian rulers, they're Oxford and Cambridge educated. So Britain, either way, tries to have some kind of influence in the ruling elites of each of the respective countries. It gives me pleasure, immense pleasure.
Excuse me,
Oh, sorry, yes, my apologies. There is a short film, and then we'll go to our next speaker. Thank you, Brother.
Protesters demanded change and an end to the ruling Al Khalifa family's monopoly on all power and the country's wealth. Since the start of the revolution and until now, the authorities have chosen violence as a way to squash peaceful protests. Weapons have been frequently used on the protesters. The shotgun has been their weapon of choice. And it was with that that the young Ali Mashema, the first martyr of the revolution, was killed. From that point onwards, the numbers of martyrs has continued to grow, and to date, the number of martyrs exceed well over 100. Some of the martyrs, like Abdul Reza Buhmaid, were killed by live ammunition, and some, like Isa al-Radi and Hani Abdulaziz, were beaten to death. Others, like martyrs Karim Fakrawi, Ali Sakar, and Zakaria al-Ashiri, died in detention as a result of torture. While Ali Bada was run over by a police vehicle to death, and the suffocating gases that the authorities threw on the houses claimed the lives of many Bahrainis. While others were kidnapped and murdered, like the martyrs Yusuf al-Muwali and Saeed Hamid al-Mahfouz. As the authorities violently cracked down on protesters, they were supported by Saudi troops who occupied Bahrain in March 2011. Following this, the Pearl Roundabout, which was seen as a symbol of the revolution, was demolished. The authorities didn't stop there. 30 mosques and places of worship were also destroyed. Prominent leaders and figures of the revolution were also detained and later sentenced to lengthy terms in prison. After the crackdown, the Bahraini Independent Commission of Inquiry was set up to investigate allegations of human rights violations. The body issued recommendations to the authorities, including holding torturers to account and issuing compensation to victims. However, many of these recommendations were left on the shelf, which prompted the Human Rights Council to issue a further 176 recommendations against Bahrain in May 2012. Although the authorities accepted most of the recommendations, they failed to implement them. Instead, they tightened their security measures and further restricted freedom of expression. Soon after, they banned demonstrations in the capital Manama and sentenced Nabil Rajab, the president of the Bahrain Center of Human Rights, to 2 years in prison. In November of the same year, the Bahraini authorities revoked the citizenship of 31 members of the opposition. They also issued laws restricting freedom of expression as well as sentencing anyone who offends a king to 7 years in prison. The establishment was also granted further powers, allowing them to use terrorism laws to punish political opponents. Thousands have been arrested as a result of this law, including doctors, engineers, tutors, women, the elderly, children, and even infants. Whilst they received lengthy security sentences, the authorities turned a blind eye to the real terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Bahrain is no longer a safe environment for human rights defenders to continue their work. Shortly after returning from Europe, having exposed the human rights situation in Bahrain, Nabil Rajab was sentenced. Sisters Mariam Al-Khawaja and Zainab Al-Khawaja have suffered a similar fate. Leaders of the political opposition who operate within the formal frameworks have found themselves being arrested and detained. Sheikh Ali Salman, Khalil Al-Marzouk and Saeed Jamil Kazim are all an example of this. The regime has failed to enter into a serious dialogue with the opposition and to resolve the current political crisis, going as far as expelling Thomas Malinowski, the US Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, in July of last year.
It is a country which is travelling in the right direction. It is making significant reform.
Despite reports of 4 years of continuous human rights violations, Britain's Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond claims that Bahrain is travelling in the right direction, a statement seen as being a mystery by many. But when they looked into this further, they realised it was connected to Britain's recent plans of establishing a permanent military base in Bahrain, the construction costs of which will be borne by the Al Khalifas. The human rights situation in Bahrain has rapidly deteriorated in front of the international community, who has largely remained silent.
Mr. Hammond's statement, Bahrain traveling on the right direction, which is, I see it very disappointing. And unfortunately, we have seen very negative English foreign policy towards our revolution in the past year, and very damaging. And I do believe they have to show the part of the responsibility of the violation, because their negative support the Bahrain government have been seen here as a green light, and that's why we see Bahrain government is not traveling in the right direction. It's traveling in the wrong direction, unfortunately.
Leaving the people of Bahrain with no other choice but to bring down the regime.
I would say to Mr. Hammond that the regime is indeed traveling the right direction, but the right direction of abyss. I can't see anything else happening to that regime. Okay, it has taken 200 years, but 200 years is a really blink of an eyelid in historical context. So I think soon it will see its end, like so many other regimes have seen in the Middle East. This gives me an opportunity to declare where I was at that time. I was at Pearl Square myself. I spent 4 nights with these 2 brothers, which I obviously didn't have an opportunity of meeting them in Bahrain at that time. But I wrote a short poem for Bahraini people and for the Pearl Roundabout, and I shall read that to you. This was written at that time. Pearl Roundabout, a magic roundabout of dignity, as you saw there. A magic roundabout of dignity where people are eager and ready for liberation. No more exploitation, no more humiliation. No Sunni, no Shia is the chorus. We are all Bahrainis is the chant. An undistinguished square takes on a new life. It has become an icon, a symbol of hope and unity. Day and night become one here. People from all walks of life mingle. The young and old, the frail and able, women and men, rich and poor. Witness raw humanity. Fear of the royal dictatorship is absent. The outing of the Khalifa family is sought. Oh, knave Khalifa clan. Oh, knave Khalifa clan. I call them the KKK. Your days are numbered. You may call the Saudi charlatans to intimidate and silence people. This game will hasten your demise. Symbol of dignity, you can dynamite. Symbol of dignity, you can dynamite. Your diabolic, despotic tyranny no longer can subdue the spirit. The magic of the roundabout is runic. Apocalyptic is your destiny. All will cheer in delight when Khalifas are kicked out. Joy and happiness will prevail. I can only, after this, request my next speaker, who is a regular visitor here and also has spoken on many, many occasions on different topics. He's very versatile, very competent to talk on many issues. I would just introduce briefly by saying him a little bit about him. He's a reverend, a Christian, and the perspective that he's going to present is on a Christian view of the just war or intervention. Please welcome Reverend Frank Gillian Womaner.
May I speak to you in the name of the one true God? I was actually asked to speak at the last moment, so I would say that my brief remarks will be structured around three main points: imperialism, monarchy, and the House of Saud. Three connected points. Imperialism. In 1956, Anthony Eden, who was Prime Minister of Britain, in cahoots with France and the State of Israel, invaded Egypt because Gamal Abdel Nasser had nationalized the Suez Canal. Well, it was a debacle, chiefly because the United States had its own imperialistic strategy and it did not support Britain. So the British, the French, and the Israelis had to pull out. It was an ignominious defeat. And in a way, it was the end, the practical end of the British Empire. The British Empire, Britain had already had a vast overseas rule, but it was not until when Benjamin Disraeli was Prime Minister, and Queen Victoria decided to make Victoria Empress of India after the Sepoy Rebellion had been extinguished in blood. So officially, from that moment, there was a British Empire. Now, this empire syndrome came to an end, of course, official syndrome came to an end when India became independent after World War II and in practice after the Suez debacle. But the actual mental syndrome never ended. Never ended. It's quite clear, isn't it? Why should places like Gibraltar, Belize, the Falkland Islands be under British rule? Look at the map. It doesn't make any sense, does it? They are so far away, it's just not sensible. Bahrain is not formally under British rule, but de facto what's going on is the result of British influence. And that leads me to the second point, which is monarchy. Now, some of the previous speakers have already alluded, for example, Prince Andrew, Sandhurst. Prince Andrew, yes, the Prince Andrew who has been involved, his wife, former wife, the Duchess of York, demanded what? How much did she want? $500,000, $1 million to arrange an interview with Prince Andrew? He didn't know anything about it, did he? Would you have paid $1 million or $500,000 to speak to a chap who really said, hello, sir, how are you? So we just have a good idea of what's going on here. Sandhurst, yes, a training ground for all sorts of little tin pot monarchs, kinglets. I spent 2 months in Qatar, in Doha, and the ruler of Qatar, the Amir at the time, Sheikh Hamad, a very large man, and now I think his son rules, he had been trained at Sandhurst. Check online, and you see Prince Charles reviewing the Sandhurst lineup with the Amir of Qatar just ready to file out of it. So we have here, and Prince Charles, did you see Prince Charles dance? He was so dance in Saudi Arabia only a few months ago. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I love the Saudi sword dance. I'd love to dance it myself. But I will not want to go along with the policies of the House of Saud. And this leads me to the third point, which has to do also with just war, as our chairman just mentioned. Now, the Saudis have been Britain's really right-hand men in the Middle East. We know about the invasion of Bahrain. Bahrain is a tiny little island, which was not threatening anyone, was invaded by the Saudis. Invaded by Saudi army. And that could only be done if, with a tacit approval of the British and other Western powers. Yemen, more recently, invaded. I mean, these are not just wars. These are unjust wars. I'm not going to read off the whole just war criteria, but I've done a whole dissertation on it, so I could do it. But this leads me up a very sectarian card, which the West has played. I'm sure many of you remember King Abdullah or Joe Jordan some years ago mentioning, evoking, conjuring up the threat of a Shia crescent, or a great conspiracy to take over the Middle East by the Shia. Now, this is nonsense. It's complete nonsense. Shia minorities in the Middle East just want their rights. Like the case of Bahrain. In Bahrain, they're not minorities. They're actually the majority. How can you say, how can you deny the majority of people in a country their rights? It doesn't make sense, or it makes an evil sense. Now, and lastly, some of you might have heard of a famous forgery going online under the name of Mr. Hempher. Mr. Hempher was someone who was supposed to have been nursed or cherished and sort of looked after by the British to inspire the famous Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the founder of Wahhabism, to do what he did in order to further British long-term aims in the Middle East. Now, this is a forgery, but the point here is, if you were to look at what has actually happened, how the British have actually helped the House of Saud to get into power after another sort of famous spy and adventurer sort of investing the glow of romanticism. Lawrence of Arabia had done his work to divide the Arabs, bamboozle and divide the Arabs in the First World War. Then it was the House of Saud which was put in place to further British imperialistic aims. So we got here a thread of actual imperialistic strategy connecting up the House of Saud, the British monarchy, and of course all sorts of economic and financial interests, last but not least. So what we got here is a monster, which we have to fight, and God willing, inshallah, we will defeat it.
Thank you very much, Reverend, for your inspirational comments, as usual. Our next speaker is a Director of Advocacy for the Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy. He studied in the UK, obtained his BSc degree from the University of Brighton, and returned to Bahrain in 2008. He was among the youth who spearheaded the 14th February Revolution in 2011. He was injured in the attack by government forces on Pearl roundabout in mid-March of that year. He was then arrested and severely tortured. Since he obtained political asylum in the UK, he has embarked on his human rights work, which took him to Geneva, Paris, Brussels, and Washington in pursuit of justice for the people of Bahrain. Please welcome Sayyid Ahmed Al-Wadehi.
Thank you so much for your remarks, and thanks for inviting me to speak. I would like to start by stating something back into 2013, when the King of Bahrain was invited for a horse show at Royal Windsor, and he was sitting next to the Queen. So I decided to take one action. That action was to go and protest in front of the Queen and the King, and say a message of the Bahrainis that dictators should not be invited. I shouted loudly, where it ended up by me being arrested by the police and then detained for a few hours.
They're not dictators. Kings and emirs are invited, you see.
Yeah. So what I got from that, and I could still remember the day when the King of Bahrain, that was in May 2013, the King of Bahrain then hosted an event where he delivered a speech. In that speech, he remembered or mentioned the importance of the UK-Bahrain relationship and the friendship that it is in its strongest terms, where it goes back to 200 years, when in 1820s the British and the Bahrainis signed the first agreement, until a new agreement was established in 1971, where the British decided to withdraw from the Gulf. And he was reflecting the regret that such a decision was made, where he quoted his father, who asked you to leave. That remarks where the Emir of Bahrain, Sheikh Isa, and this is something that's written in the history, that he went into depression when the British decided to withdraw from Bahrain. So this does reflect something. It does reflect how they feel that they cannot really sustain the power without this support. In 2011, when Bahrain faced what we call it the most popular uprising in its recent history, for a small population like Bahrain, when you see over 200 protesters in the street calling for democratic change, and some of them called for the overthrow of the regime, then you would see this could be the most popular uprising within the entire Arab Spring, because comparing the small population, which do not exceed 700,000 of native Bahrainis, then that's a massive number which got to be remembered. The Bahraini authorities, in order to maintain their power, they relied on two powers. One is regional context, which is the Saudis, which they quashed the democratic movement when they crossed the bridge by using British-made armed vehicles to crush this democratic movement, where it resulted in thousands of people got arrested, people were killed under torture, and Bahrain entered a new chapter where unprecedented crackdown was facing this country. The support where Bahrain could be confident to continue its repression measures is quite alerting. And if we wanted to remark something which was quite recent, and I have to highlight some important recent events where we've seen when Ban Ki-moon, for example, decided to withdraw Saudi Arabia of being within the blacklist of killing children. The reaction from the Saudis, they could say to this entire war that we could buy the silence from many countries where we have political interests with. From the US, we could buy their silence by purchasing over 20 billion worth of weapons since the war began in Yemen. For the British, which is the second biggest market, 3.4 or over 3 million is a good figure that we could buy the silence of the conservative administration. But the question continues. Then there would be a body, which is the UN, which this could be a venue of hope for many of the victims. When they can twist, or when they can twist the arm of Ban Ki-moon and say to him, look, if you keep us on this blacklist, we're going to withdraw 100 millions of our funding, and then you have to change your decision, otherwise there will be consequences. When that decision was changed, then we begin to witness a new era for Bahrain, and that era that those Gulf repression countries could do whatever they wanted to do by making sure that there would be no consequences. And this is why a new era or a new chapter of repression began on 13th of June 2016. I was in Geneva at that time when we heard Nabil Rajab, who is the most prominent human rights activist within the region, was arrested on the day when they opened the Human Rights Council session. Geneva Human Rights Council sessions usually this is one of the best opportunities for the Bahraini government to exercise its PR, to show how much they are significantly improving, and all thanks to the UK government for providing 2.1 million worth of training program to the Bahrainis, and they could be in confidence stating that we are helping the Bahrainis to reform, and we're helping them in a number of projects. So the Bahrainis usually would go to Geneva to show their PR exercises and show the significance of the improvement in the country. But this time, they did the entire opposite. The entire opposite is to arrest what the international community would consider a red line. That man is on an important member or the undersecretary for the International Federations for Human Rights. He's on the Human Rights Watch Advisory Committee. Someone with a very, very heavy weight and most prominent human rights defender within the region, arresting him on the day of a Human Rights Council session, that's something no one would expect. That goes even beyond. Next day, the High Commissioner, or probably the same day, the High Commissioner, Prince Zaid bin Ra'ad, had some remarks on Bahrain, and he began to talk about the issue of repression in the country. The Bahraini Foreign Minister responded to the High Commissioner's remarks that I'm quoting him, we are not going to waste our time by listening to a High Commissioner which has no power or strength. This is like a new law that Bahrain before, with the backing of UK, and we just heard Philip Hammond how he was stating Bahrain is traveling into the right direction, hitting or hitting back to the UN High Commissioner, where all the states are meeting, is something really, really alerting. So the question would remain, what would empower Bahrain to be in a position which is so confident that they can attack anyone they could? During that time, it's not only Nabil Rajab which was arrested, but Al-Wafaq, the largest political opposition party in the country, was officially dissolved. They hit on what we call it another red alert. The most senior Shia cleric in the country was revoked from his citizenship. How could a government justify its measures to this international community without any consequences? The answer is very simple. And I wanted to just reflect one example which just reflects not only the hypocrisy of the UK foreign policy, but rather the cover up and the misleading. And this is what Bahrain needs the most desperately during this time. In a case of Muhammad Ramadan is someone who is sentenced to death, and he was accused of killing a police officer. The only evidence they got against him for that ruling was based on confession which was extracted under torture. He detailed how he was tortured to the judge, and that there was no evidence even given to the public prosecution. The only evidence they sustained was through what we call it evidence submitted during interrogation with the criminal investigation unit. Is the hub of torture in Bahrain. This is something where all torture would be conducted. So the case of Muhammad Ramadan, who was sentenced to death, was raised with the UK government. And a parliamentary question was tabled to the FCO. It was specific about his case. So the question was about whether they have received any evidence related to torture in relation to Muhammad Ramadan. So what Tobias El-Wood, who is the Middle East minister, responded, the ombudsman, who has confirmed that whilst there have been a number of complaints raised with his office, in the case of Mr. Ramadan, there have been no allegations of mistreatment of torture. The police ombudsman receives significant amount of the money that the taxpayers are paying, an amount from the conflict project, which the FCO is funding Bahrain. So they've been claiming that the ombudsman is the body where any victim could complain into. The evidence which we got an official complaint was submitted on behalf of Muhammad Ramadan to the ombudsman. We took that email with the application of the complaint and we forwarded it to the FCO, telling them there was, and here is the evidence of communication of complaint submitted to the ombudsman related to torturing this person. We thought there would be a correction to their statement, because now they are in a position to say, we've seen the evidence, although the Bahraini ombudsman misled us, but now an evidence come to light, and here is, and it was illustrated. So we sent that to the FCO, and we haven't seen any correction. They said they promised that they will investigate. Same question about the same person, Muhammad Ramadan, was asked whether you wanted to make a correction about the statement, and then the minister continued to mislead the parliament, stating that we are pleased to see that the ombudsman has officially launched an investigation. And we appear not to see any evidence, we appear not to receive any evidence related to Muhammad Ramadan. The only way that people could expose this misleading is through testing the FCO with evidence. The moment we provided them with that evidence, and the moment we were in a position where we could illustrate how the FCO obtained all this evidence, but they decided to mislead. It's not the first incident where the parliament was misled. We've seen a recent correction which was quite similar, related to Saudi Arabia, about war crimes committed in relation to international humanitarian law in Yemen. And then we've seen the recent retraction or correction by the ministers. But this policy of supporting the dictators in Bahrain or in Saudi Arabia and arming them, and also like providing them with the training, with various things, which only will provide them with the political coverage, is something will be a black mark in a British history. I would end my remarks into here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Indeed, not only would it be a black mark, but I think, we say the chameleon changes colors, but Britain does not appear to be changing colors at all. It stayed black mark with so many other atrocities committed globally. I would request the audience to please, we've got a good 25 minutes for a nice open discussion Q&A now. I'll take the gentleman right at the back first, then I'll come to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for really important contributions and points and perspectives that we've heard. I would like to ask one particular question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. One particular question arising from the film, very powerful film, and it's extremely important, this current of anti-sectarianism that ran through this uprising of 2011, the refusal to be categorised as Shia, whatever, as distinct from Bahrainis. But I'd like to raise another question regarding the social composition. My own research, reading and writing is really making much clearer to me that all the key moments, we've heard of some of them, the mid-1930s, the mid-1950s, it wasn't as simply an undifferentiated population. Very much at the centre of these struggles and these high points of struggle were the Bahraini labour movement and trade unions. And I won't go into the details, but I think that is well known, that is accepted. And that happened even in 2011, the centrality of the Bahrain Teachers Association to what happened, which is what brought my union, UCU, the University and Colleges Union, into this struggle. Now, I would like to ask particularly the three Bahraini speakers, after the repression, the clampdown, everything that's happened since 2011, are there still independent, non-state infiltrated, non-state controlled trade unions in Bahrain?
Okay, can I take the next question here, please? I'll come to you in a minute. I've got a gentleman behind you first. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
It'd be nice to know your name, who you are.
My name is Dr. Mohammed Tariq Kokar. I am from First Dialogue. I thank Brother Frank for a very frank view. And continuing on that,
yeah, that's fine. Just keep it close.
Continuing on that, I will add one incident which brings to light that Britain is not only ruling us, this is us, me in Pakistan and India, through Sandhurst. I have a good claim for that. It's also planning to rule for another 300 years. Not planning, actively seeking to plan us to rule us for another 300 years. So wake up, Muslims. I can tell you one example. Your favorite Prince Charles visited in one of the private hospitals in London. Who he visited? He visited Nawaz Sharif. Nawaz Sharif is the present ruler who has been exposed of plundering the whole wealth of Pakistan, millions and billions in Panama leaks.
Sorry, brother, can you pose a question?
That's my point. My question is very simple. What if there was no oil in Bahrain?
If there was no
oil in Bahrain?
Okay. Well, there is no oil, effectively. only 40,000 barrels a day. So, in the scheme of things, this is not much. The gentleman at the back, please.
Thanks very much. Actually, it follows on a little bit from that question, because I heard of this long history, which I didn't know it went back 200 years of Britain with Bahrain. What I'd like to get to is what is Britain's strategic interest now in staying in Bahrain. Obviously, there's the armament sales. It's profitable for the arms sellers, but to me, there must be an underlying strategic interest. Now, it isn't specifically oil, I assume, because, like you say, I assume Bahrain doesn't have much oil itself. Is it the only thing I can think of is that Britain wants to keep a foothold, even though it's supposedly left that region in theory. It wants to keep a foothold in that region specifically.
We have seen international community, nor United States, nor United Nations, nor the International or the Human Rights Council have shown any muscle to impose the international law on Al-Khalifa regime. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel whereby they will impose the international law on this regime, or you don't see it at all?
Okay, I'll take the next set of questions afterwards. I would like the... Okay. After the panel addresses the questions raised, I'll come to someone else who wants to make a comment. Is there the two Bahrain? I'm not a Bahraini. I'm sort of Indian, Pakistani origin, British national who's lived here in the UK. So we've only got two Bahrainis here on the panel. So would you like to address that? If you want, is there any role of the trade union movement? Because I remember when I was at Pearl Square, there were sort of stands of the teachers, of the electricians, all the different unions that were operating in Bahrain. Have they been completely muzzled, or are they operating in any shape or form?
I'll just tell you my own story. The General Trade Union in Bahrain is the biggest and the strongest trade union. I've been fired from my work in 2010 because when they arrest me, there is an order from the National Security Agency to fire me from my job. And then I've been in hiding for 2 years. I couldn't follow up my case legally. So last year, I needed an experience certificate from the company that I worked for you for 12 years, so I need just an experience certificate, which is one of the basic rights that any company should give it to me. I sent one of my brothers to the company, they refused to give it. Then I talked to the Gulf Air Trade Union, which I used to be a member of it. When they went to the HR, the reply was, if he wants that experience certificate, he should obtain it himself here. Then I talked to the General Trade Union in Bahrain, and thanks to the Sayyid Mahfoud, the head of trade union at that time, he tried to talk with the company, he tried to talk with the Minister of Labor, and there is no way that the company could provide me with the experience certificate. Even the Minister of Labor himself spoke directly with the Gulf Air CEO, but the reply was, no, there is no certificate for this guy unless he come himself and obtain it. And I can't provide a power of attorney because my citizenship is being revoked, and I have no way to obtain that. Just to answer Ali Fai's question, which is there any hope with dealing with the international community and international institutes? I don't know, but I don't think by dealing with the international NGOs or the Human Rights Council, which is led by the countries member of the United Nations, I don't think that this will provide the solution in Bahrain. But unless there are a political change in the region, I don't think that the international community will put a pressure on the regime of Bahrain to make any change.
Okay. Do you also want to say?
Yeah, just a quick responses. The leaders of the trade unionists, most of them were attacked systematically by the regime when the crackdown began in 2011. The head of Teacher Society, Mahdi Abedib, and number of all the leading unionists were targeted by the regime. Most of them ended up in prison and subjected to torture. So that is something important to remark. And also when you discuss that this was a popular uprising where there wasn't any differentiation between Sunni and Shia. It was an uprising about unity as well, which was the key message by the protesters in 2011. But the regime, in order to counter a very straightforward argument, pro-democracy versus dictatorship, the only thing they could counter this strong argument is to have this narrative where they started demolishing Shiite mosques, although Shiite mosques has nothing to do with the protest demand and so on. But to change this narrative, you have to start with action. Even if this action does not seem to be logical, but then you can get some hits on the media to say a Sunni government demolished Shia mosques. It may not make big sense, but later on, years later, you will begin to learn how the sectarian card could be something effective. What if there is no oil in Bahrain? I think it's not about the oil in Bahrain, and no one could distance Bahrain from the geopolitics. Bahrain is in the heart of sensitive region, which is the Gulf. So you cannot distance Bahrain from Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, and from the rest of the GCC states. And just for the record, those states are the priority market not only for arms industry, but also a priority market for the economy. So I think in a research which we conducted, the trade between UK and the Gulf states is more than any other trade in the entire universe. So it's even more than countries like China or anything like that. So it's a strategic ally where since 2010 David Cameron has a strategic policy in order to overcome the financial crisis. They set this region as a financial market and a priority market, and the evidence and the figures suggest that this would not come without political support by the UK government. Thanks.
I would like Reverend Gilly perhaps to address a couple of questions that were raised from the floor. If there is no oil, what is the strategic reason? I know Sayyid Ahmed has alluded to some of the points, but perhaps you can throw some light on it. Plus also, is there light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, of course, there is also a huge US Navy base, which is stationed offshore Bahrain, and then links up with this importance of strategic importance with my fellow speaker just mentioned. But considering, you have to look at the wider concept, considering that Britain has been colluding and actively participating in imperialist American spearheaded wars since 2000, invasion of Afghanistan, invasion of Iraq, bombing of Libya. All this quite clearly must spell out some kind of strategy. Britain, once a proud independent country, ruler of the seas, the British lion, now it is America's lapdog. And it seems to me that that's what we are talking about here, this imperial syndrome, which has not died out. And Sandhurst, again, Prince Charles, we all love the Queen, but Prince Charles, when he becomes king, I think the monarchy will be far less popular. And some serious questions are going to be asked about the role of monarchy in colluding and links with these tin pot dictators, the various shuyukh and Saudi Arabia and all that. And light at the end of the tunnel. We got a job to do, and the job is to fight. Okay? We got to fight for good fight, as St. Paul says in the Bible, and fighting is the only way of getting to the end, to see light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you, Frank. I would like to come to you, Andrew, if I may, because you're sort of campaigning against arms trade. So one of the sort of key questions, obviously, like Sayyid Ahmed was saying, that the whole of the Gulf region contributes hugely to the overall trade of the UK compared to even India and China. So is it just arms trade, or is it more than that, which makes Bahrain so important to Britain?
Thank you. Well, the first thing to point out is just the sheer scale of it, the sheer numbers of it. The Middle East is a very small region, but it accounts for roughly 2/3 of all UK arms sales. Now, by far the largest buyer is Saudi Arabia, and since the bombardment and destruction of Yemen began last March, the UK has licensed £3.3 billion worth of weapons to the Saudi regime, This is bombs, this is missiles, this is fighter jets, all the things that are being used day by day to create a humanitarian catastrophe. In terms of what underpins it in relation to Bahrain and the wider Middle East, I think it's impossible to divorce Bahrain from Saudi Arabia in terms of UK foreign policy. And I think a large part of the relationship has been about building that permanent military presence and increasing the UK's geopolitical influence within the region, and about improving its relationship with Saudi Arabia as well, particularly in the kind of ongoing Cold War which is happening between Saudi Arabia and Iran as well. And I think factors like that undoubtedly are taken into consideration. Another point about it is that to take a stand against human rights abuses in Bahrain would also involve the UK having to take a strong position against human rights abuses in the other countries which are allies with in the region. It would look very foolish and very hypocritical for the UK to say that human rights in Bahrain were beyond the pale, but not in Saudi Arabia or not in the United Arab Emirates. So I think a large part about it is about ensuring that that double standard can stay in place, and that the allies are not being judged by the same standard which they would judge the regimes which they are less friendly with. In terms of the point about Prince Charles, it is worth mentioning that when he was doing his bizarre dancing routine, which it has to be said, he looked wonderfully awkward throughout. It was truly a hilarious picture to behold. But actually, the event he was dancing at was sponsored by BAE Systems and took place the day before a major multi-billion-pound deal for fighter jets was announced between the UK and Saudi Arabia. I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever Prince Charles was being sent over specifically to butter up the Saudi regime for that deal to take place. On the point of if there is any hope, I think that there has to be. I think there has to be, because all change seems impossible until it happens. And it does seem like a very, very high mountain, but that has always been the case when change happens. Thinking even how the world has changed in the short time I've lived on it. I recently turned 30. I know I can shave 5 years off. Well, thank you very much. But when I was born, there would have been an iron curtain across Europe. Half the world was living in. The Cold War was still going on. Nelson Mandela would have been locked up in prison. We haven't seen all the social change we wanted within that time, but we have seen the world change a great deal. And I would hope that in 30 years' time, there are people with greater freedoms in Bahrain and the surrounding region who view the dictatorships and the despots in the same way that we now view communism or the apartheid as something which was a kind of historical relic and something where that era has passed. And that social change may feel a long way off. And it is possible that it won't happen. It is possible that through campaigning effort across the globe and working with people in Bahrain and further afield, it is possible that that change won't happen. But it definitely won't happen if we do nothing. And I think that by standing in solidarity, by working together where we can, I think we can at least ensure there's a greater chance of change happening.
Before I take the next set of questions, yes.
Can I put a question?
No, before that, I've got a statement from Mr. Al-Bandar, who's here. Is he here? Could you...
Mike, can you stand up?
Thank you very much, sir. Last time I think you were speaking from the rostrum. Please.
Well, I wasn't really intending to do...
You're not related to Prince Bandar, are you?
I am.
You are, okay.
I am, definitely.
But not the same ilk, you know.
No, I am related, by the way.
Okay.
That's not a joke, really, that's the reality.
Okay. No, I said not of the same ilk, though.
No.
Okay.
Well, it gives me a great sense of responsibility to make a contribution to this.
Thank you.
Because the issue of the day, that why after all these international resolutions, why after all these very meticulous reporting of very serious violation of human rights in Bahrain. The international community is still not taking what's going on seriously. It seems to me because people are not really understanding the connections between international and regional interests and the issue of dealing with the international obligations of human rights, whether it is international mechanism or in the preamble of the Universal Human Rights Declaration. We are living in a very difficult world at the moment, where we have a lot of competing issues at the same time. If you are sitting in an editor room in the BBC, you receive 15, maybe 20 different issues every 5 minutes. And you have maybe a news broadcast which is not more than 10 minutes at a time. So it's very serious to pick whatever you think it is serious, it is eye-catching or sound-catching for the interest of the British public opinion, or at the same time reflecting whatever wider influence the British government is having around the globe. I think, from my modest experience dealing with all these issues, at least for the last 10 years since we published our report about the situation in Bahrain, that the international community is very worried about the division within the opposition forces in Bahrain. Every time I go and I meet any one of these people, they are trying in a way to belittle the influence of the issues in the Gulf in general, in Bahrain in particular, by saying, we don't know what these people are really asking for. Are they asking for a redress? Are they asking for the rule of law, or are they asking for this or for that? But it seems to me this is just an excuse. So I came back and I tried for the last 3 years to remind the opposition forces in Bahrain that without really sitting down and organizing one center for their rights and for their voices, they will never be really taken seriously. At the time when all the embassies in Bahrain is taking notes of every single issue happening by the day, even more seriously than the Bahraini themselves. But at the end of the day, it's ended in the shelves of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs everywhere, or at the committees in the Human Rights Council. So today, when we are sitting here, I have no message whatsoever, rather than mentioning for so many times, now and then, that the economic interest of the British in Bahrain is rising. I mentioned this some time ago, and I said 34% of the banking deposits and assets in Bahrain at the moment is sourced from England and the European Union. So if 1/3 of the total assets of banking system in Bahrain is sourced from the Western Europe, then we will think seriously that if the European money in Bahrain is nearly equivalent to the total number of the Gulf states' sources of money, then we can see the irony here. That's why I said it is very serious for us who is living in England at the moment, or Britain here, is to take the issue from being protesting in front of the Prime Minister or the British, the Saudi embassy or the Bahraini embassy, to the City of London, where we see every 6 months or so very serious financiers going to Bahrain and talking to the current rulers of Bahrain about their interests. So it seems to me there is no oil, yes, but there is even more precious than oil. There is a lot of money and interest. And Bahrain banking system at the moment is a bridge between Europe and the Far East as well. That's the point I want to make it much clearer than ever before.
Thank you very much. I'll just take 3 short questions, please, because I need to come to the gentleman there, and here I'll come to you last, please.
Yeah, I don't think money actually has got any relevance. There's 5.3 trillion pounds go through the city of London every single day, and Bahrain comes nowhere to 1 billionth of that money. The question which I'm put to the panel, which is very relevant, is that international law has no meaning because there is no force behind it to enforce it. Nevertheless, domestic law is very powerful. Why hasn't anybody in Bahrain taken a step towards indicting the British government for aiding and abetting the crime being committed by the Bahraini government on behalf of imperialism? Now, that is a very, very serious matter, because law is about the most powerful tool that could be used in any battle or persecution. Imperialism can dictate what it likes, it can do what it likes. Bahrain and the rest of the GCC are not independent countries for us to theorize about how they play the role and what is the relationship between the King of Bahrain vis-a-vis the British government. They are all agents of the master, basically. They're agents of the master, let's not fool about it. 6 despotic regimes, they would never survive one day without imperialism backing. The problem with the people of Bahrain, and I'm sorry to say that, is that they cannot, on one hand, seek freedom and independence and at the same time be pro-imperialism. In the third world, fighting for independence must mean fighting imperialism. And the people of Bahrain have not been anti-imperialists. I'm sorry to say that. It may hurt my brothers in Bahrain, but they have not been anti-imperialists. And the proof of that was that they supported the war against Iraq, which itself was an imperialist war. Thank you very much.
The gentleman here, right in the front. This gentleman here. I'll come to you last, as I said.
Yeah, my question is for the two. I want to make a comment, and I have a question for the 2 speakers from Bahrain. You really don't get a lot of publicity to highlight the problems of injustice and democracy in Bahrain. How do you think you can get your message out to not only the public here in Britain, but throughout the European Union and in the United States? And I want to make a comment about the film. In the film, it showed doctors and nurses. I'm an Irish Republican, and a number of Irish doctors and nurses were arrested in Bahrain in 2011. And they gave international, despite the fact that they were not involved in the politics of Bahrain. They were just ordinary Irish people there working to get a living, largely driven abroad because of imperialism. And they focused international attention on what was happening in Bahrain. None of them were politicians, but they were interviewed, and their supporters were interviewed on Irish television and Irish radio. Members of Sinn Féin raised the issue in the Irish Parliament, in the Irish Senate. Members of Sinn Féin raised it in the Assembly in the occupied part of Ireland. And members of Sinn Féin highlighted the plight of Bahrain in the European Parliament. So even though people, that is how a small group of Irish people who are not really involved in the politics of Bahrain, that is how they focus international attention on the problems of injustice and the denial of rights in Bahrain. Finally, I want to make 2 comments. One about Prince Charles, and the other is about Lawrence of Arabia. Unfortunately, Lawrence of Arabia was an Irishman. He should not have joined up with the British state imperialists. He should have joined the IRA and fought for the freedom of Ireland. They did exist. They did exist then, yes. And the Freedom, yes, they did. They were founded in 1918 by the democratically elected Sinn Féin government. Okay, sorry. Now, the other one is about Prince Charles. Many of you will have seen today the priest with the handkerchief. He was the priest who led one of the bodies away from the British Parachute Regiment, who shot dead 13 unarmed Irish civil rights marchers in Derry, the same as the civil rights marchers were assassinated in Bahrain. The point I want to make is that Prince Charles was Colonel-in-Chief of the Parachute Regiment who murdered the Irish people in Derry.
Thank you for it. And the final question, the gentleman behind our Iraqi brother. No,
I'm Faisal Hassan from Ahwaz, southwest of Iran. I'm the director of Ahwaz Center for Human Rights. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. But I would like to mention that my people are suffering, as our Bahraini brother are suffering from torture, execution, persecution, oppression. But the only main question which I've got from our brother Bahrain, what is your position about the crimes perpetrated against my people by the Iranian regime, as we are sharing common tradition and habits? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there any role for international law? Have you tried getting the British government prosecuted for aiding and abetting the Bahrain?
I'll just first answer the gentleman's question about that we don't have focus on the media. I think the activists here in London are doing a great job, and they are keeping the story of Bahrain live by a weekly column or a news that written in The Guardian or others. So the activists here in London are really doing a great job. It's also the money game that the Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I have some experiences that I've been invited on one of the big shows here in British, and just 6 hours before the show start, they called me and they cancelled the show. And then I discovered that the Saudi embassy has his influence on the BBC to cancel the show. So it's not only in London, it's even in the United States that the Saudi money is playing a big role that not putting the Bahrain story on the media. And if they want to talk about Bahrain, they will only talk about the human rights issues. They will not talk about the need of a political reform. About the Iraqi guy, that he was saying that there are two issues about the money and about the imperialism. You talked about the third world, that they are not against the imperialism or something, but I know the people of Bahrain, and I know that they are against the imperialism, and I know that they are fighting for their freedom to be an independent country. And about the money, maybe the budget of Bahrain or the money coming or going out of Bahrain is not that much, but it's also the indirect money that coming through the relationship with Bahrain. I mean, the Saudi Arabia is trading billions with the Western world, so they don't want to access Saudi Arabia, which is the special ally of Bahrain.
Andrew, just a quick comment from you on aiding and abetting. Is there any sort of, you've been involved in the armament trade and exposing it. Is there any room to maneuver in prosecuting the British government in aiding and abetting, whether Bahrain, dictatorship, or any other?
It's an interesting time to be discussing it, because at the moment I don't know if people are aware that Campaign Against Arms Trade has a legal case against the UK government for arming the Saudi Arabian regime in war crimes which it's been carrying out against the people of Yemen. We had our first hearing in the High Court at the end of June, which granted the judicial review, which means that that by February 1st, 2017 at the latest, there must be a 3-day full review on scrutiny of UK arms exports to Saudi Arabia. We believe this could be a very important step in getting the end of arms sales to Saudi Arabia. In theory, UK arms export law is very clear. It says that if there is a clear risk that weapons might be used to violate international humanitarian law, then the arms sale should not go ahead. In relation to Saudi Arabia, we know that this is the case, that UK weapons have been used for this. We know it because the UN has told us this, the European Parliament has told us this, Amnesty International has told us this, Oxfam has told us this, Human Rights Watch, almost every single credible humanitarian organisation in the world has told us this. The only people who have said otherwise are the Saudi Arabian government, which has shown a total contempt for democracy and is somehow still trusted to investigate itself for war crimes. We are using the courts, and that is a very important mechanism, and we want to see real change, and we believe that that next year's the case, which we're expecting to be next January, could be a crucial step in this, and could be a crucial step in exposing the hypocrisy and the doublespeak at the heart of UK foreign policy.
But it's not a criminal proceeding, is it?
It's the judicial review proceeding.
That's not good enough. That's only a moral judgment. We want a criminal proceeding to put the criminals in the dock.
Well, by all means, if there are lawyers who wish to follow that case, we would undoubtedly support it. I think this could be a very crucial step, and I think that actually the arms trade to Saudi Arabia is right at the heart of UK arms export policy, but also wider UK foreign policy. If there's anything we can do which makes it any more likely that those exports will stop and that link will be broken, then I think that's going to have a better result for the people of Yemen and a better result for the people of Saudi Arabia and the wider region as well. Certainly we have hope for that. If there are legal avenues which are open and lawyers who are interested in looking in the direction of criminal proceedings, then obviously we would fully support that and we would fully encourage others to take part in that. In terms of using the avenues which are open to us, this is one way in which we are doing it, and whatever the result in the High Court next January or next February, whenever it falls, whatever the result in the High Court, the campaign must continue. And it must continue as long as the UK is arming and supporting dictatorships and human rights abusers. And whether that is through campaigning in the courts, or whether it's through campaigning in the streets, or whether it's campaigning along with the media and using the media to expose the hypocrisy, to expose the corruption, that's all steps we must take.
I'm afraid we've come to a close. My humble apologies to anyone. I'm so sorry. Time sometimes does not allow everyone to have an opportunity. Sorry, if I can give you, then I'll have to give it to others. It won't be fair. Please forgive me. I also apologize if all the questions have not been addressed, because time is not on our side. So before I end, I just want to relate one short story to all the people who are here in audience, because the narrative, as Sayyid Ahmed was saying, is being portrayed by the Bahrain regime as though something Shia-Sunni issue. Bahrain movement was called the Shushi movement when it first started, meaning the Sunni and Shia together, nothing to do with food, Japanese food. It was called the Shushi movement. Shushi. And just one aspect, there's an editor-in-chief of one of the main English newspapers called Mansour al-Jamari, Dr. Mansour al-Jamari. He used to be here in London. His wife is Sunni, and his father-in-law, I remember on the Friday that I was there, he turned up on Friday morning to see whether medicine and all other facilities were available. And his family name is Khalifa, nothing to do with Khalifa, but his family name is Khalifa. So the Sunnis were actively participating in that Pearl roundabout situation. So the narrative that is being portrayed is completely different than what was happening on the ground. I'd like to thank our speakers, guest speakers, for coming here and really informing the audience as to what's happening in the Gulf, particularly with Bahrain. Please do thank Dr. Maulana. And I'd like to thank you, the audience. Without you, we could be speaking to the wall. So I do thank you all for coming here on this evening on a sunny day in London. And please join us for a meal downstairs. And look forward to seeing you next time when we have our program. Thank you.